All right, today is July 10th. This is the regularly scheduled Finance Committee meeting. I'm calling this meeting to order. Those present, currently right now, it's myself and Counselor Shoup, and we will be joined by Counselor Slyther soon. Item number 3 is approval of minutes. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Any discussion?
Nope.
All those in favor? All right. So we'll be talking about 2 items today. So the first one will be to review and consider the Marshview CA request. So this is a continuation from our conversation at our last meeting, where last time we did not have the impact analysis. And so we'll go over that. And then we will review some of the scoring that we had to do by policy and then make a recommendation to council. The other item is to review the financial impact of the new schools based on the work that was done by the SBAC. So just as a matter of making sure that the finance committee does our due diligence, just review that material and make sure that we understand it and are aligned with it. So perhaps because Counselor Slyther isn't here yet and we're going to be having to take action on the CEA request, maybe we start with the school discussion and then we can go from there. I know she's much more closer to that than Counselor Shoup and I are. So is that okay with you, Counselor Shoup? Yeah. All right. Sorry to throw that loop, but I just want to make sure we have the full committee here before we talk about that one.
So I did include in your packet some materials developed by the SBAC committee, and I think these were generally shared with the Board of Education back on June 26th. They are not the entirety of the slides, but I just tried to, for you, those of you that weren't following it very closely, it really just intends to educate you what the recommendation was and gives you some detail. Pleased to go through that if you like, but I think you're really focused on the financial aspects. So essentially, in a nutshell, the recommendation for the committee was twofold. There was a basic school solution, I'll call it, kind of question 1, and that involves touching all of the schools in one sense or another. I think it's easiest to maybe consider it that goal, that question 1 really focuses on removing all of the portable classrooms is a kind of an easy way to think about it. So it involves the full replacement of the 8 Corner School, expansion and renovation at the 2 remaining, those being Blue Point and Pleasant Hill, a very modest addition to Wentworth, and then an addition to middle school for the purposes of removing the classrooms, the portable classrooms. That total project is just under $130 million, 129,850 to be exact. And secondarily, the committee also recommends a secondary question, which would be contingent on the first question passing, and that would be to essentially provide additional capacity for expected enrollment in the middle school. And that is an additional $10 million. So that would be a further expansion of the addition, if that makes sense. So question 1 could stand alone, and certainly the 2 projects could go together. So we've, for their purposes and now for yours, we've modeled kind of those different pieces and then combined them for you. I did hear some interest on your part, also understanding the other option that was considered in kind of the final analysis and that financial information here as well. And just to be totally transparent, this is really the work of Norm and Nick. I just happen to be the one that gets to talk about it, but it's credit is all to them. This analysis was based really on the debt model that was created some years ago. It's been updated to reflect all the current budget information, certainly. Also, the impact of the reval has certainly been accommodated and considered in the model. And you'll notice for each of the models, we've called out the assumptions made. And one of the key ones I want to mention, some of the early work, I had been using an interest rate of 3.5, and that was based on our most recent bond issue. We were about 3.25. Just to really be conservative, we've increased that to 3.75 and think we'll do better, but I think for purposes of this modeling, it makes sense. So that's a key assumption that has been built into the model and been used throughout. And
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah,
real quick?
please.
Is that perhaps the most sensitive factor in this model that ultimately plays the biggest role in terms of what?
I will defer to my colleagues. I think we've done a sensitivity analysis. That's certainly one of them. I think there's a number of other assumptions that have been talked about in the past that have some sensitivity as well. Nick, do you want to?
I would also defer to Norm, but I would say it didn't move the
Keep going.
needle that much, changing the interest rate. Obviously some. The biggest lever is the amount borrowed.
Okay, so that ultimately, that makes sense. So
Yeah.
because these interest rates are so low as it stands, like another quarter percentage point.
Right.
While still having impact, doesn't matter as much as if it was like 150 million versus 130 million.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah, and the other things in terms of growth in the valuation, budget growth, I think that all of those have been kind of well thought out. I think we've been appropriately conservative. We've got very good data to support what we've made. The system, as it was originally designed, is open source, so
Mhm.
anyone can go in and change those if they wish, but we stand behind. We think these are as reasonable as they should be for this purpose at this point.
And of all the input factors, it's probably the one we have the least control over.
Right.
the interest rates.
Yeah.
Mhm.
However, a cut or two from the Fed and, this is really changes on a dime. So, those assumptions are basically built in to try to account for the market and our credit rating
Mhm.
and those factors.
I should also mention the various committees that have studied this matter did a number of survey explorations in the community, really kind of uh, understanding why we failed. And certainly cost was a major one we heard loud and clear. We understood from some of that work that there was a level of acceptance in a annual tax increase between $200 to $400 a year. And so we use that to kind of back into what does that translate to construction costs. So early on, we had developed kind of a range of 70 to 130 million, and the committee really took that to heart and labored over that number because they were constantly at the upper end of that. And so not surprisingly, what they wanted to see from the financial analysis is really kind of a breakout. What does it mean to the average taxpayer? And that's what is shown here. And there's some other things that we can and will do when it comes time to borrow in terms of smoothing out some of the impact in the early years where some of the highest impact occurs. And so we've reported in any number of ways, individually, year by year over year, in 10-year increments, 30-year average. And that was the source of a lot of conversation at the committee level, and I think appropriately so, and will be important as we talk about this to the public going forward as well, should the question get on the ballot. Yeah, some of the things we'll do at the time of borrowing, potentially we could put additional money in to offset some of the upfront debt costs that will help smooth out those, again, early years. We also made some assumptions on how much and when we need to borrow it.
Mhm.
We're assuming over a 3-year period, which it may be as many as 4. And the amounts that we need to borrow will be really dictated on the cash flow analysis that's done at the time in terms of what we need and when we need it. But we had to make some assumptions for this purpose.
This model also assumes a 3% increase to the mill rate year over
Yes.
year, which has been the council goal set standard, but we did not come anywhere near 3% for the past 5 years. And then this year, we kind of just said, let's leave that goal on the shelf and see what the budget, what the budget calls for. But, having a 3% assumption in this model accounts for quite a bit of money,
Yeah.
especially in these high impact.
And we also assume over the next 5 years, our budget costs will be going up, and it's baked into that tax rate, of
Mhm.
course, just about 5%, and then it falls back to about 4.5%, which again, we've got historical data to support that.
Yeah.
So
Well, the one thing that the model doesn't account for, though, which I'm assuming is something we will do after the school passes, if it passes this November, is update our impact fees, right? So
Mhm.
there's a portion of money that would be coming from new development that would offset some of these increases, right?
Yeah,
Like,
we'd use that to offset debt service,
Yeah.
that thereby the taxpayers wouldn't need to pay that.
mhm.
In fact, I'd like to advance that, update to the school impact fee sooner than later. We now have a project, a cost. I don't see a reason in waiting. We should have that in
Mhm.
place as soon as we can, so.
And I want to say last time the assumption was almost 20 to 25% was, would be covered by impact fees. So this is a
Yeah.
conservative estimate where it sounds like there's still some things we're not considering, impact fees, how we structure the debt, because we had to make assumptions,
Right.
and then how the council in the future may decide to, yeah, impact spending that
Sure.
could hopefully provide some relief, especially in those early years where you're seeing,
Right.
pretty high increases, which then dip pretty significantly
Right.
in the like nearish term.
All of that is true, and I expect future councils will do whatever they have available to them to help, smooth those high peaks out.
Mhm. Great. Any questions for Tom? Aaron, any questions? No? All right. Well, I mean, I think, again, this was great work that was done. I remember we did something similar when we did this for the last school. The one thing that might be helpful, Tom, and I don't know if it's going to be in September, October, is to have Joe Kutera come and kind of, again, give us an assessment of where we are on our
Mhm.
metrics that the rating agencies look at. I know last year our debt rating went up, which was great. So I'm assuming it's gonna be maintained. But just looking at those metrics before this goes to bond, I think would be good for the committee to look at. I don't know, Norm, when's a realistic time we can expect that? Because I know we just closed the books on the last fiscal year. So is September a reasonable time frame?
For Joe to come present,
Yeah.
that would probably be an ideal time because that would be before the audit's finished and it would give us a nice report.
Yeah, we won't have all the final fund balance numbers in terms of performance, but we should have a pretty good sense by then.
Yeah, we can just note it as preliminary before we close the audit out and have the final numbers, but I think just having the finance committee look at that data, I think is always helpful around, but before we go to bond with something big.
Yeah, I will say when we received our bond rating upgrade, we were very clear to have deep and thorough conversations with the analysts that this was on the horizon. And you might recall in their rating reports, they call it out. So, you know, I just want to make sure that we're clear with them and that was reflected in their upgrade.
Great. So if there's no comment on the council side, is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? If so, you can come to the podium and you'd have 3 minutes to speak if you're interested in talking to this particular agenda item. Anybody? You see someone online? Oh, Sue, you want to go first, and then we got to figure out how to get AMK on.
Yeah, Sue Hamel. I was on the committee, as you know. I will say, when I look at this chart for what the impact is to taxpayers, and I see that there's 8 years that it's $600 or more. In fact, I think there's 2 years that it's in the 700s. So it's, it's going to be a hard sell. And the other thing, I just looked up current AAA rated bonds, 30-year, 4.75, 4.55, take that back. So hopefully, Tom's got a better source than I do, but, I don't know where the 3.75 is coming from. Thanks.
Thanks, Sue. All right, AMK, we're gonna see if we can get you in. All right, you should be able to talk. You might have to
And-
unmute yourself.
Hi, did I do that right?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Yes, this is AMK, right down the street from you. My apologies up front for not having a thorough understanding of how this process has worked, but I recall the town voting down a proposal for around $130 million new school like last year. And again, I'm not, I'm a full-time caregiver, so I'm not, I don't, I don't have the capacity all the time to be on top of all this stuff. But, and then we'd just like to know sort of what the end game is ultimately to the benefit of the entire town versus this constant barrage of visiting the same projects over and over again. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment on this item? No? Would any counselor like to respond to that last comment? No? What I would say is that this has been a 2-year process, as Tom mentioned, where we've had a committee of 40 people, I think, come together in our first SBAC, then come together in this one. And again, the first solution was 2 years ago where the voters voted it down. It was a very different solution. It was a K-3 consolidated solution with updates to the middle school. Or no, sorry, no updates to the middle school back then. It did? Confusing. It's all, yeah. And so again, this is kind of the work of 2 years of a citizen committee working very hard and tirelessly, meeting almost weekly to take feedback from the community, do a lot of research, and this is where we landed. And so I think kudos to the committee for all their hard work to come forward with this recommendation. And this is just how the numbers shake out. And so it's good for us to understand and know the impact, more so that we can figure out what that means for other decision points that we have down the road.
I'll just respond to the first commenter. We did consult with our financial advisor. The 375 was based on his recommendation.
Okay, great. All right, so next on the agenda, going back, Councilor Scyther, I thought it was good, didn't knowing when you were going to arrive, to
Perfect.
start there.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep. Next is discussion and consideration of the Marshview CEA request. So I'll turn it over to Tom and Karen, and you guys can walk us through the fiscal impact analysis.
Yeah, I think there's two pieces that we'd like to focus on. One is, of course, the fiscal impact analysis. With respect to that, I should mention that our policy does require it to be conducted. It doesn't require that you consider it, which is kind of an oxymoron a bit. But nonetheless, it's done, and I think Karen is certainly prepared to speak to what it shows. And then the second piece is a piece that you participated in. The policy also has an assessment, and it involves members of the Finance Committee. Thank you all for doing your work. And so Karen also has prepared that material for your consideration tonight as well.
Great.
Okay, so on the fiscal impact, just a reminder what fiscal impact is saying, this is how much money you're generating. This is how much we think the list of services that we're looking at cost, and take the revenues minus the costs, and that's your impact. So just to start out, I want to go through just a couple of things in terms of what we used for inputs, and thank you, Nick, for having that up. So again, we know it's 51 bedroom units that are age restricted. Nick gave us the value, so it's about $7 million, total $140,000 a unit. So the net new value is that 7 million minus the original assessed value. So that gives us the base starting figure to start the analysis with. There's no non-residential development. In terms of population, what we did is said, all right, well, there are 51 bedroom units, seniors. We looked at the other example that we have from the same developer, Joyceland Place, and they had a little bit less than 10%. We thought 10% of those units having 2 people in them was a reasonable estimate. And so that's what we used and how we came up with the 55 adults living in the units. There are no students. The tax rate increases is our standard. We're looking at 3% increase. We're doing a reval every 5 years, and a 15% rate, our 15% value increase, resulting in a 9% decrease in the actual tax rate. The annual costs, we wrapped in the last year's, the fiscal 2025, And we've got about a 3.2% increase in costs annually. And then we've got the CEA request, which was 75% in the CEA with 25% coming to us. And I'm just going to cut to the chase. So in the first analysis of the 75%, we're really upside down according to our models. What I am going to say is our model is a little bit of a blunt instrument. And what's really driving this negative number is the fire department. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Nick, could you move to the next table? Thank you. It is negative at the 75% reimbursement. The issue there, again, it really is the fire department. And this is where I'll explain that when we do the analysis, we do consider the revenues that are coming from, the EMS, but we do it at the top level. So we just say, here's the total cost of the fire department. Here's all the revenues that they generate. And then what's that net figure? And we divide that by total number of calls to get that. So what that really means is, yeah, the calls that are coming from this single development, I'm assigning $1,000 more or less, a little bit less, a call. So is that the actual cost of those calls? Probably not, because more of those calls are going to get reimbursed. But because we do it at the top level, it doesn't really get distributed down to this piece. So they're accounted for, they're just not accounted for in this development. So that's why those costs come up a little bit higher. Again, that's just a straight, it's really the fire department. It's a multifamily development, so they're doing their own snow removal. They're doing their,
Not multifamily.
multi-unit.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, you're right. And so they're doing their own snow plowing. They're doing their, their own garbage pickup. So they really didn't have a lot of public works costs. So it really is down to the fire department calls. I would say when we do this, we did not, because we're just doing a straight fiscal impact, we did not look at the shift benefit that we get. And what we're seeing from the work that our attorneys did in terms of looking at the shift, they're looking about 50%. I think depending on who's doing the calculation, it could be a little bit more, could be a little bit less, but that's probably going to generate about $1 million to $1.5 million for that project over time. So it does technically wipe out that negative 224,000. But I just want to be careful about how we explain that. We're not getting more tax dollars. This is the thing that we got caught up with John Clutchy wanting us to be very clear about where that money is coming from. The tax dollars are the same. What it does is say, because we're getting this benefit, we are receiving more in aid than if we put this value into the formulas without sheltering them. So there is about $1 million to 1.5 million, depending on which analysis you use. And then I looked at 50% because that was the request. And then I looked at saying, all right, what if I'm just playing around and trying to get to sort of a flat impact? And that's really where that 31.3%, not that I'm suggesting that's what you would do. I just was looking at what's the difference? Where do we sort of break even? And if we were retaining 31%, given the high cost of the fire department as it is, we get to, hey, $900 at the end of 30 years. So that's really what's going on here. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that, but it does really follow the model to the extent that we can do it with this single project. The only things that we did do a little bit differently is because we had the example of, we actually had the fire calls from Joyce Place. So they've got a few more units, so we just calculated the calls per unit and we applied it to the 50 units here, and that's how we got those calls.
It's a very accurate estimate because they're pretty similar projects.
Yeah,
Because they're also just one bedroom.
correct.
There may be
Yes.
some aberration that we didn't try to understand further. As you know, one unit in particular had a number of calls to it. I don't know the circumstances, so I don't know that it's exactly indicative of what we'd expect here, but they are the calls we've responded to.
Yeah.
So,
Right. We didn't want to mess with that. It's like, those are the calls.
Great. Any questions? Go ahead.
So the annual increase in cost, that 3.2%, when I say I want to see the cost to serve, is that, what's the cost to serve, and explain the annual increase in cost? I'm
Sure.
trying to make sure I'm understanding this.
Just like we increase the tax base 3% each year, we take we do the starting number, which is, this was started with the fiscal year 2025. And we said, all right, here's a cost here. We're going to increase that annually 3.2% every year. So that's what that is. The actual cost to serve is the 1.6 million that's in that table.
And that's over the 30 years of the
Correct,
project.
correct.
And that 1 to 1.5 million dollar tax shelter benefit would apply to each scenario exactly the same, and that is dependent on the life of the CEA?
Correct. Yes, it's definitely dependent because I'm summing up, the impact for the 30 years.
Okay.
Mhm. I think that's important, like, even though I know it's tricky. If this goes to council and we include this information in the packet, it might be worth
Sure.
footnoting or putting some narrative in here that just illustrates that
Sure.
it is excluding that particular.
Absolutely.
benefit.
Yeah, and I will say we've looked at the shift, like 3 different ways. Weirdly, the economic development TIF or the DECD TIF, doesn't specify your methodology. So that's why I've looked at it from a very conservative, the 3 years that we have the actual data for. The attorneys have produced the shift for us in the documents, and then the applicant has provided a assessment of what they believe what their calculation of the shift is. And so the only reason I say that the applicant is using the 10.93, the existing data that we have. So that's why ours looks a little bit different, because we're doing the increase over time of the different tax rates.
Right. Any other questions for Karen on this? No?
Mm-mm.
No? Thank you, Karen.
Mhm.
All right, next, let's look at the scoring criteria. Again, this is the first time we've done one of these.
I had a
ever.
few questions.
It's not time for public comment. It will be public
Oh.
comment after we do our next conversation.
Thank you.
They do it?
Yeah, right there. Oh,
All right. Okay, next, so
Scoring matrix.
scoring matrix. Pull that up. So again, this is part of our policy for any economic development or affordable housing CEA. And really, I think this is meant to just ground the committee as we formulate a recommendation of what we would want to provide to council as it relates to this. Just for transparency, again, one of the challenging things was we were asked to rate it from 0 to 5 with no real rubric of what that is. So I made one up and shared it with the committee just as guidance to say, 0 is clearly doesn't meet. A 3 would be meets the requirement, and then anything above that would be exceeds, anything below it would be somewhat meets. And so tried to use that for us to kind of just see what we come up with, so that way we weren't all over the place with different assumptions.
Right.
So that's how we got to our scores, and I'm sure the applicant did something different, and so that's why I'm sure that they vary between the two. Which is just for me, like something maybe in the policy we
I
might need
agree.
to refine and make more specific, just because again, this could have gone all over the place with numbers, and so.
Right. It's one of the reasons why we reduced it from, it originally was 1 to 10, and that's like,
Yeah.
impossible. So we did condense it 1 to 5.
That makes sense.
So I figured maybe the best way to kind of facilitate this is where we have big differences in our scoring, just to see if we're on the same page on certain elements. So it looks like number one, we're pretty consistent as it relates to increasing the housing supply. Number two, maybe some conversation because Counselor Shoup, you had it rated low. So this is around directly implement specific recommendations of the town's strategic planning documents, such as the comp plan and other town plans. The reason I gave it a little bit more than meets was because when I actually went back and read the elements of the comp plan, it talked specifically about making senior affordable housing in Dunston. Like it almost specifically said that statement in there. And so that's where I was like, yeah, this is going a little bit more than meeting because it's very specifically called out in our comp plan that this is where we would want to have senior affordable housing. And so that's why I gave it the 4. I don't know if you want to talk to why you gave it a 3 and why you gave it a 1.
Me to-
Yeah.
So I think this is a comment that I made at the last meeting was my understanding of the comprehensive plan was that currently under it, we have to, that 10% of new development needs to be affordable and we are currently meeting that goal.
Mhm.
So to me, that's going beyond the comprehensive plan. Where like
Mm.
part of our plan was the residents and everyone said, we're willing to do 10% affordable housing of new. And so to me, we're not following our comprehensive plan because we're exceeding that.
Mhm.
And that's not something, and then that's why you're gonna get a lower score from me later,
Ah.
is because that's not what it dictates. So I think we're going beyond it.
Mhm.
And I think that's where I'm just going, I disagree with that. Because I do think part of the conversations, and I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I think there is some thoughtful conversation behind like how much affordable housing do we want in this town? Because I mean, there is a cost to the residents. And so I think under our plan, we said 10%. And so we made it very clear last month that we are currently meeting that goal. So for me, I am uncomfortable saying this is part of the comprehensive plan because we're exceeding it. And so
Yeah.
I'm just, that's why I gave it a 1.
The way I interpret that goal is like we want to make sure we sustain a healthy 10% even into the future. And so I looked at it as right now we've been pretty much meeting that threshold. But if we stop doing affordable housing, then that threshold is likely to go down, which would be counter to our goal. And so because this project itself won't come into fruition for probably a couple of years. And so the numbers where we're looking at the new housing that's come in is all stuff that exists today. But when we grow next year, and frankly, because the state is taking away our ability to control the rate of growth in our other areas, you know, we may see a lot more growth that is not affordable, that 10% might not even be achievable. So I don't really see that as a concern relative to this project. The bigger concern is I don't think with that in mind as well, like this new state law, we're likely not going to see 10% because there's not going to be an incentive for the free market to develop affordable housing. I don't know, Counselor Scyther, if you wanted to weigh in on your.
I gave it a 3 for the reasons that you stated. Just I felt like it was specifically called out for the Dunston area in the comp plan and similar to your thinking on 10% goal being over the course of our growth. I do think it's important to continue to consider projects because if we lean too heavily on we've already met that goal, then it's not going to be long before we've slipped below that line again.
And the goal in the comp plan on page 122, it actually says at least 10%. So that could be considered a floor.
Mhm. All right, the next item is number 5, which is demonstrate long-term commitment to affordability. So the reason I gave that one meets is because according to the applicant, I think it was a 45-year commitment to keeping it affordable, which to me meets the term long-term. 45 years is a long time. And so that's why I gave that one a 3. Do you want to talk about the 1?
I guess the fact that it won't be affordable forever.
Forever. That's your definition of long-term is forever.
I guess so.
Yeah.
And
That's fair.
that's because I mean, we sit here and we say, we got to keep up with the 10%, but then, you know, as this rolls, we're losing and gaining, we're adding. And so, I mean, this, again, it's great that we're doing it, but it only helps us for so long, I guess. And then eventually, I guess it's confusing to me what's going to happen after that.
Yep. Anything, Counselor Scyther, you would add?
45 years, a commitment to a cap, to me met the criteria.
All right. Next is meets a specific goal of the town. So again, for me, we don't have a specific affordable housing target, except for what Tom mentioned that's in the comp plan. And so our goal for the town council this year, we have a desire to focus on affordable housing, which is why I gave it a 2, because it's not specific to anything, but related to our desire to better understand affordable housing in Scarborough and where we want to go. I don't know, Counselor Scyther, if you want to add anything on this one.
Same, I would just say that even though it doesn't specifically meet a stated goal, I think one of the goals of this council has been to take a really thorough look at our affordable housing stock and the decisions that we're making. And so I think that this particular project, when we are maybe looking at some of our other goals around quality of life and transportation and some of the other things that we spend a lot of time talking about, I feel like this project meets some of those other needs. And it's not necessarily all about the number of units or the permits that we're issuing. So I gave it a 2.
Counselor Shoup?
Sure, yeah, so I'm uncomfortable with that one because to me, we represented to the public in January that we were gonna have discussions around housing. And so here we are now making financial decisions around housing. So for me, I think we haven't had that conversation. You haven't even had that workshop that we promised. I think, I had said Saco is having multiple workshops. We were gonna reach out to Saco about how they're running those workshops. I haven't seen that happen yet. And so for me, I do feel this obligation to the residents that we very much said we were going to slow things down, have a conversation about this. And so that's why we haven't had that conversation yet. I really don't feel like I can understand how the residents feel about what our specific goals are for housing right now. And I do feel uncomfortable with that.
All right. Next is located in an area with sufficient access to local services and job opportunities. Anybody want to start this one?
I'll start this. Oh, go ahead, Karen. I think that this is easy to reflect our own bias about the way we maybe live our day-to-day lives without kind of looking at it through a different lens. And one of the slides that was presented to us, I think it's actually been presented to us a couple times, is that high view map of Dunston with all the different businesses on it, with all of the different services that Dunston has to offer. And while I would drive from place to place, I would drive from Walgreens and then drive to get my hair cut and then drive over to On the Vine. There are so many businesses and services in that area and they are walkable. Those crosswalks are signalized. I feel like it is very safe. The sidewalks are up off from Route 1. And so to me, I just feel like that area absolutely meets that criteria.
Are there signalized crosswalks at Route 1 in Payne or is it up at Broad Turn? Is it Broad Turn?
Route 1 and Payne.
It's a signalized?
It is, yeah.
And I think that's, I guess, sufficient access where I would say safe access. Because when I drive through here, people are just running across the street. They're not even waiting for it. And I think for job opportunities, I mean, I was working with someone all spring trying to find a job and we could not find a job in that location. I mean, trying, any sort of job listing within there. And so I think that's just the consideration and what my experience has been there. I believe I do believe there's local services, but I don't know. So I struggle with that one. I think I don't know how safe it is.
Yeah.
Sufficient access, but as also with job opportunities, there's no job opportunities. And I think that's my picture right now in Scarborough and that, because I just didn't see them.
Yeah. I looked at this probably more relative to like where else it could be in town. And so if it was in our RF zones, there's clearly no access to services or jobs locally. And so, I think this is partially why our comp plan calls out for this type of growth, specifically in Oak Hill, Dunston, and the Downs, because that's where our economic centers are, and that's where the jobs are, that's where the services are. And so that's why I gave it the score I gave it, because it's, I think, one, meeting the intent of where we've said we wanted it to be, but also really where the only parts of these services and jobs are available or actually are. So All right, next is the walkable area, which you kind of talked to, Counselor Scyther. I don't know if you want to say anything else on the walkability factor.
I don't think it's, I mean, when I just look at this spreadsheet and I look at the application, the, the resources for walking around Dunstan are there. If we need to shift our behavior to accommodate a lifestyle shift where people are going to be more frequently walking, that is, to me, is not a reason to not have a project go in place that where the resources are available. The sidewalks are built, the crosswalks are there, they're signalized. I just feel like, yeah, it's not necessarily safe given the way people drive on Route 1, but let's change our behavior and not limit the project.
Yep. Anything else on walkability? Yeah, I just gave it a 2 because even though I agree with what you said, Counselor Scyther, I do feel like that area in general, and it's probably Route 1 in general for me, like I would be afraid to walk along Route 1 too often. And so I think that's a bigger issue of the town where, we need better walkability, bikeability, especially along Route 1, which I know the transportation study and things are contemplating. So I think we'll get there, but for now, I just had a hard time saying that. To your point, I was looking at it from a safety perspective. Is it truly safe? But you're also making the good point of like, some of that is in behavior and how you choose to be if you're running across before the flashing lights
Please
happen.
don't do that.
Yeah, that's not,
right?
that's not good. So yeah, so again, this is kind of where we landed. Any general takeaways from doing this exercise or anything that you guys think based on doing the scoring?
No, I was gonna say something about the TIF, but I can see where that would apply to other
Yeah,
projects.
let's keep going, but there's more. So I think we're pretty similar there. We're similar on infrastructure beyond the current project, similar enough to adheres to higher standards of buildings design, enhances environmental standards resulting in more sustainable community or provides access to natural resources. So we're a little split there. So the reason I gave that a 4 was because my understanding is that what this project is going to do in terms of stormwater management
Mhm.
is going to be significantly greater than what's legally required. And there's no stormwater management happening on
Currently.
that site today, which is close to the marsh. And so I felt like because they were exceeding state standards and guidelines, that's why I gave it a 4. Anyone want to share their point of view?
Well, explain provides access to natural resources to me, I guess. And is that for just the project or for residents as a whole?
I was thinking of that kind of as the fact that they were going to have some trails and stuff there,
Mhm.
keeping a lot of the greenery that was part of their project. So I just felt like that's how I kind of interpreted it. But again, to me, the bigger thing was, are they maintaining or exceeding environmental standards was my bigger piece.
Yeah, to Karen's point, that's why I gave it a 2. I split. I said, I think they're meeting one side of the house on this and maybe not the other. So
I think they're reducing total impervious surface as part of this project
Mhm.
from what it currently is. There's a
Mm.
big parking lot in the back.
Yeah. All right, over sense of extraordinary qualities about the project. I mean, I felt like it's a good project and it's a great affordable housing project, but when I think of extraordinary qualities, again, I didn't think it was anything extraordinary. I thought it was a great project that's meeting a lot of the terms of the policy.
the challenge I have with that one is I think that the residents will be very happy. I think they will be thrilled with their resource, like with the parcel and what they have for a view and what they have for, maintenance of their property. And so in that sense, Jocelyn Place is absolutely beautiful. Like they have a beautiful courtyard out back. Like I think that the residents will think that that is an exceptional place to live. And so for that, I could have given it a 5. But if we're talking about it in terms of like overall community, that's where I think we all kind of, we've been conditioned to answer that question at a global level. And so that's why I gave it a 2. But if I was not thinking about it globally, then I do think that I think the residents,
Mhm.
that this is lovely.
Yeah.
And again, these 4 criteria are not required and probably not terribly applicable to a housing project, but nonetheless, we put them on.
We put them on because we thought some of the aspects of the project relate to that. And I think the one thing that is not reflected in these is the fact that this project is really redeveloping a piece of property that in its existing form
Needs some
doesn't
attention.
contribute to the overall aesthetics of the area. So I didn't know if
I
there was a
think that's
place
fair
for that.
point, Karen.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's good. That's good for that one. Yeah.
That's what Luna Cafe was it was a building that we didn't want there. And we
Lifts
did
the
it,
antiques.
and now it's chaos. And,
Oh,
and
it's,
so,
it's delicious.
Um,
You say chaos, I say delicious.
so, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, as a resident looking at the project, I think that's why I gave it a
Yeah.
0 is because it's the
Mhm.
feedback we've received and just,
Yeah. So again, my general takeaways from the criteria and the scoring exercise was this project is meeting a lot of the requirements of the policy that, um, what that means in terms of how council decides to factor that into their decision is really up to each counselor. But at least for me in doing this exercise, I think I feel strongly that this is a good project. Like to me, it just confirms it's a good project. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts before we open up to public comment.
I would encourage other counselors, and I'm happy to email the full council, and just have them take a spin through the scoring sheet, just to kind of see where they would land maybe on some of these things before this comes to full council discussion. Because if nothing else, it does require you to sit down and look at each criteria and look at the application. And we can have completely different outcomes and completely different opinions, but at the very least, it does ground us all in having looked at the same criteria.
That's a good idea. All right, so with that, I'm gonna open it up to public comment. So what we will be deliberating, and I want to give public commenters the opportunity to comment first, is what our recommendation is to council based on the application. And so for those watching and those in the room, essentially the application has requested a 75% CEA over 30 years, which is what we were looking at in the financial analysis. And that's really kind of the purview of this committee, is to give a recommendation on that specific item. It's not a binding recommendation, so what we recommend doesn't mean council has to support or approve it. It's just this committee's recommendation for council for consideration. So with that, I'll open it up to public comment. If there's anybody in the room who wants to comment, or anybody online. I know AMK, you wanted to speak, so here you go. All right, I'm gonna unmute you. Or
Thank
should be able
you.
to-
That working okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great, thank you so much. I've written a bunch of notes. I'm just going to run down as probably just points to consider that, don't need necessarily a response to, but these are my thoughts. First of all, I haven't seen in any of the proposals in the past year or two a 10,000-foot view of what exactly the city council and the committees and the people who are running the town, the city, actually have for a 10,000-foot view of what they actually want, how they want to respond to what the residents of Scarborough want this town to look like in the long run, like minus the project here, this project here, this project here, the developer here. So a 10,000-foot view of like, what is the ultimate goal of what we want Scarborough to be, and how are we getting there versus, addressing each little developer who comes along, or housing authority says, oh, we'd like to build this project for you. I'm really glad that the fire EMT sort of issue or consideration was brought up. However, while I heard a lot of things about numbers of calls and the money associated with those calls, I didn't hear anybody say, what are you going to do about staffing up the fire department and the EMTs to be able to accommodate the growth that the town is planning? Like, again, what is the 10,000-foot view? And I know people on those who serve in those civic roles. And I told them I will speak up for them because I just think it's really short-sighted to not consider how difficult it is to recruit and maintain and build up a staff to respond to this kind of growth. While I am well aware that these developments are very lucrative for developers, I'm also well aware that oftentimes things happen that are not part of the original plan and that make these projects less lucrative after they've already been built for the developers. And so what kind of considerations are being made to prevent developers or owners or management from converting or otherwise shifting the sands of these projects? Bigger question, and this is something that's confounded me for a long time. I don't know how big the downs are. Okay. What I do know is that we could have built an incredible state park or something of those lines along in the downs to attract people from all over the country to help the economic bottom line of our town. Come here, spend money, spend time, hotels and businesses and whatnot. And so what's confounding me about these developments is if we have all these thousands of acres or how many ever in the downs where the whole selling tagline is live, work, and play in the downs, why are we looking at other parcels that people may be challenged to get to the supermarket, walk to something that they need to get to, like a Walgreens across Route 1, or who can't afford to shop it on the Vine, who need to get to Market Basket in the downs? And excuse me, I'm just switching my page over here. And while I appreciate the comment about people have to change their behavior, there's consideration for people to change their behavior in order for these things to work, because not everything's going to be built perfectly to everybody's specifications or needs. If people change their behavior based on what society or good practice dictated, there would be a lot less problems that we have right now. Like there'd be fewer traffic jams, there'd be more people riding their bikes, there'd be more people going to the gym and exercising so they don't get sick. I think predicating money and development and location on people changing their behaviors is just very short-sighted. And the last thing, thank you for your patience, is when we're talking about affordable housing, I haven't heard anybody say, and I'm guessing it's somewhere in the paperwork, but the word is being thrown around a lot. That would be consider that if we're building 10% affordable housing per project, that means 90% of that is not affordable housing. So why are we building non-affordable housing for 90% of a project when it is a critical need right now, way more than market rate housing is? And I mean, people who have jobs and 2 jobs and no kids aren't able to afford a small house because there's nothing affordable. So we tend to associate affordable with people who are old with limited incomes and who don't have the capacity to earn more to pay for an affordable house when that's not the case. So I think that's a really dangerous slope to be sliding on. And for people who are building for seniors and they think that building a 1-bedroom apartment where a senior can live independently is really short-sighted, because the majority of seniors, especially here in the state of Maine, require some kind of in-home care. And many of them would have somebody living with them if they had a 2nd bedroom, and it would prevent them from having to be forced into a nursing home. So
Maybe I'm going to ask if you could please wrap it up.
yes, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Anybody else would like to comment on this item?
Sue Hamel. I know that South Portland Housing has said that they need the 75% CEA because they absolutely need the 3 points. And the 3 point, a 1 point difference means getting funded or not. And I'm sorry about that the state hasn't provided enough funding for these projects. I think Ben was talking about how many projects came up on the last round and how few, there were fewer got approval, got the funding than ever. And yet the state at the same time is saying, we have a housing crisis. We have a housing crisis, but we can't provide any money to fund these projects. Well, I do know that CEAs for housing, it's one of those things that it's not something, it's one of the rules about CEAs is that you don't give CEAs for housing because if it's a worthwhile project, it will happen. The developers are coming anyway. And I'm sorry that that they absolutely need to have a 75%, a 50% wouldn't do. And but I feel like it's putting a lot of the demand on the Scarborough taxpayers to fund this in a way that there's no guarantee that a single resident of Scarborough will be ever able to live in this building, that they just go on the list with everybody else. And the rubric for this that you guys just went through, there was nothing on there about that takes into account the negatives that come with this project, the additional traffic and all the tie-ups and all that stuff on Route 1, and the fact that at least the images that I've seen of the building are, it's not an appealing building, and it's going to be right there, right smack, really close to Route 1, and I'll be really sorry to see that built. So, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Sue. Marvin, you have your hand raised. I'm gonna let you speak in a second if I can figure this out. All right, Marvin, if you unmute, you should be able to speak.
Thank you.
We can hear you.
Yeah, Marvin Gates, 423 Black Point Road. Briefly, when I was a voting member of the Long Range Planning Committee and helping to write the current comprehensive plan, I understood that the comprehensive plan was for Scarborough. I think that's sort of so simple that nobody could really refute it, not that anybody would want to. So the thing that sticks in my craw about this project, and it was touched upon briefly by Mrs. Hamill, is that there is no way that the town of Scarborough can guarantee in any way that a current resident that's being asked to help foot the bill for this project has a chance of benefiting from it directly. And therefore, I see the big picture of this project as being one that, in all honesty, is attempting to benefit the demography, so to speak. And that's a little above my pay grade, but that's what I understand it as, of Scarborough, by increasing the affordable housing units in Scarborough. So the current residents of Scarborough are being asked by you to help subsidize this project so that people who don't live in Scarborough necessarily will benefit from the affordable housing that Scarborough provides. Well, I can see my dogs have already told me I've spoken enough. But I will say, my name's on the comprehensive plan, and I'd really like to hear the council and you, the finance committee, address this seemingly important issue to me. So thanks. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marvin. All right, is there anyone else who would like to offer public comment? All right, with that, I will close public comment and turn it back to the Finance Committee. So again, what we are looking to do is to make a recommendation whether the council should approve a 75% CA over 30 years, or if there's something else that the committee feels like would be a better recommendation. With that, I'll just open it up to either of you if you guys want to start.
Question.
Yep.
What's the date of the comprehensive plan? Like, how recently was that updated?
I believe it's 2020 date.
I wanted to understand.
I think 2021, and then it was approved by the state in 2022, 2023. Yes.
All the
because
years
it-
start to blend together.
Yes, I know it does. But yeah, it's a little
Some
bit
of those were
later than that.
COVID years, yeah.
And I don't think the comprehensive plan, I understand that they designated Dunstan as a growth area, but I can't imagine it gets into detail of like design standards and what we vision that to look like.
What the comp plan does recognize is that Oak Hill and Dunstan are the two major villages within the town with certain architectural standards, but does it articulate those? No.
Yeah, and I mean, I think generally I wish we had better design standards throughout the town. I think what one of the comments was like, what we're looking at just doesn't fit with the neighborhood. I understand that they're allowed to do whatever they want to do under the zone and the planning board is going to let whatever, but when we're sitting here and we're making these considerations, that is a consideration for me, but it doesn't look like it's one of the criterias. Because, when it's built, the residents are going to say, look at this, and we're fun, this is part of our money and it does not fit the Dunstan area, just aesthetically. And so, but I don't think that's a criteria, is what I'm understanding. I guess for a CEA, I thought there had to be some sort of benefit to the town of Scarborough or to its residents. So I think maybe that's a little bit of my misunderstanding, but I guess I'm struggling with how this is benefiting the town of Scarborough, where we can make absolutely no guarantee that any resident of Scarborough would be given the right to, or have preference for access to those units. Are there other affordable housing projects that earmark certain amount of units for residents or things like that? Or is that just not something that's
It's
done?
illegal.
Yeah, it's against federal fair housing law.
Yeah.
We do have language in Jocelyn Place, and I'm proposing similar language here, and I'll read it. It's buried in a section, but it says, this is to the developer, they've implemented and applied in accordance with applicable laws and regulations a local preference for individuals living or working in Scarborough in its tenant selection plan.
Mhm.
So there's no guarantee, but we certainly have included that language, that expectation as part of this.
Yeah.
Agreement.
And this is a common conversation that comes up. I think every time I've been a part of a conversation around this type of housing,
Right.
this question of providing preference to existing Scarborough residents comes up. And so I think that that's a natural inclination to kind of question that and to poke at it and try and mandate it, frankly. And we're certainly not the first.
Yeah, and I can say for Jocelyn
Committee.
Place, as near as we can tell, and sometimes tenants aren't terribly forthcoming in their history, but there's 11 or 12 folks that currently reside there that have some prior connection to Scarborough.
And I think, a little bit of like trying to mandate it to Scarborough residents, again, the piece that I think like I'm a Scarborough resident. I don't need this, but my parents aren't Scarborough residents and they'd love to live in Scarborough and be close to their grandkids. So I think it's a slippery slope too of like, then you'd be shutting out potential applicants that would contribute to the community as well. And so I think personally, I get that there's a law that we can't dictate it. But again, if there's
Mhm.
coordination with the builder where when they're ready to launch it and start making applicants, that we have a coordinated effort within Scarborough so that we can make sure that we can promote it if Scarborough residents want to take advantage of it.
What we've done with the most recent projects, this and also Avesta across the street, we've actually publicized the enrollment initial tenant lease up
Invitation.
through our different communication means. The intent of which is we're communicating with Scarborough residents.
Yeah.
And then it's up to them to go through the process and compete along with other applicants.
Yeah. just to Counselor Shoup's other comment, the one thing that Long Range is actually taking on is looking at the TVC districts to do exactly what you described, but that's a long process in order to do something like that, because we're talking about changing zoning standards and things like that. So I anticipate in the next 2 years, there will be things in place specific to like aesthetics and how we may want to revisit some choices in the TVC to better build that vision of the future. But again, that's going to be a long process with a lot of public engagement. I would say personally, aesthetically, like one that's very subjective, but if you ask me to describe what Dunstan is, I would have a hard time describing like what it's supposed to be today, because I feel like it's a lot of different styles and
There are
there's
plenty
brick.
of non-conforming buildings. If
Yeah.
I was gonna say brick, right? Like, so I would say, I've lived here my whole life. I would say brick. But there's a lot of buildings in Dunstan that are not brick.
Right.
And
I think the
so-
height too, I think the fact that we're coming close to the road and this is gonna be a building that's taller than probably any building that's in that area, on that side of the road, I think is what, but I understand that is not one of the considerations.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about something Counselor Shoup said about the CEA requiring public benefit? I know that that's was part of the contract zone process.
It is required as
and it
part of.
Required. Is that part of this, or is that
No,
only
but
through
I-
that process?
I can't imagine you do this if there isn't some level of public benefit that you think is there. But unlike the contract zone, which absolutely requires compliance with the comprehensive plan and demonstration of sufficient public benefit.
Okay,
Mhm.
I just wanted to make sure that
Yeah.
that same component wasn't part of.
I think the thought process was throughout the state, not just us, that affordable housing is a public benefit.
Right.
Is baked into that concept, and that's why the state makes affordable housing CEAs available.
And I think the real reason we have CAs, not just economic for affordable and economic, but it's really to, again, give incentive for projects that wouldn't otherwise happen because of market factors. Like that's why CAs exist. It's not for public benefit. It's to allow municipalities to have a lever to incentivize certain types of things that the free market otherwise wouldn't allow to happen. And so that's partially why for affordable projects, they need this in order to go and get the funding that's required from the state. Otherwise, this project would never happen on its own. Like it's just the market forces wouldn't allow it. And there's so many hoops to go through, including coming to a town asking for a CEA, which no other, market rate project has to come to the town and request anything like that. They come, they meet our standards, they build, they move on. The other thing is, just kind of circling back to the CEA, I know people have concerns and, talk about how this is subsidized housing. I just want to remind people that this is their value that they're creating given back to them. And, I think the subsidy would be if the cost to serve shows that they're not
Right.
able to cover their costs. And so according to staff, while it's a conservative estimate, when you factor in the TIF, even in the 75%, they would be covering, this project existing would actually be covering itself fully. Say conversely, if this was a free market, 3-bedroom project or a 20-bedroom single family project, this whole community would be subsidizing that a lot more because it's really school-age children that drive. So I have 2 kids, they go to the school, that's 20,000 each. I'm not paying 40,000 in taxes. So thank you, Scarborough, for helping with that. And so again, but that's kind of how government works, right? That's partially why we pay taxes, is to help, subsidize and equal the playing field for everybody. And so people who are concerned about subsidizing, I just would ask you to think about what the alternative could be, because the alternative is likely probably going to be worse in terms of subsidy if it was a 20-bedroom or 20 single family home project with, nice 4-bedroom homes.
And that's true. Something will happen on this lot. I don't know what that is. And there's a lot, I think, appropriately made of traffic given its location and so on and so forth. I dare say that this project probably has some of the least impacts in that regard than other things that are permitted in the zone. Again, I can't tell you what it will be, but I think it will be something more impactful than this.
I think just talking about design standards and other things, the one thing to remind everybody on this project is they are following the existing zoning.
Correct.
So they're not, there's no, the contract zone, which would allow you to sort of pick and choose which standard you apply to. They are following existing zoning.
Just one final point. A lot has been made, and appropriately so, of the need, the competitive nature of particularly the low-income tax credit program administered by Maine Housing. And I think that's absolutely true. I've also come to appreciate that these projects work on very, very thin margins. It's not a big lucrative deal. And so the benefit to the bottom line of reimbursing a portion of an expense, property tax in this case, does help the overall financials of a project of this sort when the margins are so thin.
Mhm. So any thoughts or reactions from the committee in terms of the 75% over 30 years? I'll start. So
I mean,
Go ahead.
I'm happy to start. I'm still thinking about what you said about subsidies. I'm still thinking about something Karen said, like, this is,
yeah.
I fully understand and appreciate, like, this is a really big conversation, and the spotlight gets shown on an individual project every time we have this conversation. But like, there's so many things that I want to say and want to talk about, in terms of, subsidy and some of the stigma that is centered around, and this idea of it being lucrative for developers. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of narrative that we could get into and untangle. And so I'll put in a plug for my and John's Counselor Corner Live, which is happening next Tuesday at the Public Safety Building at 6 p.m., where I will happily maybe untangle some of the noise that's happening inside my brain right now. But in terms of the CEA, there's raw numbers that we have that we're looking at, and a lot of it is based on assumptions that could change, and some of it is based on who did the calculations. I can appreciate that the developer needs the points on their application. I think we also sit with our political hats on, and that this would probably feel better to the residents at 50%. And I don't know that it would have support, public support, the court of public approval at 50% either. I don't have any idea what the other counselors are thinking, but the number in red as presented, that we would be underwater, and I understand, and I can appreciate that that's without the $1.5 million, that 1 to 1.5 million in tax shelter benefits. But I would be comfortable with a recommendation at 50%, which gets the developers 2 points on their application as opposed to 3. That being said, if it is the will of this committee to approve or recommend the 75%, then I could probably be swayed that way as well.
Counselor Shoup?
Sure. I cannot support the CEA. So I think if you're going to ask me at 75, 25, 30%, I think I've made it really clear that I'm actually, it's the council goal. So I think my understanding of the council goal that we met is that we would not be making these decisions in the next year. And I'm sticking to that, because that was my personal, like, I support this goal because I wanted to have these conversations. I really want to hear from the residents. So I understand our comprehensive plan was written in 2020. I understand, but that work was done before 2020. And we've had a survey from residents who are like, holy cow, growth, like, what's going on? And so I think, also, like, I really want to be thoughtful and take a step back and really understand what residents are feeling. I understand that we designated Dunstan as a growth area, but what does that look like? What does that mean? We're just now picking one property and saying, we're going to do this way and this way. I don't know what the growth area looks like, I think, for me. So for me, I'm uncomfortable moving this forward for those reasons.
Mhm. So I'm probably leaning more towards Counselor Scyther in the sense that, I'm looking at this not just from this specific project, but given that we just looked at the financials for the school project and how we have that as a key priority for our community. You know, I'm putting on like my fiscal CEO hat and I'm like, life always comes down to making choices. You have to prioritize fiscally what you're going to do with your money. And when we have such a big ask coming on the school, it does give me pause to say we need to prioritize things and make sure that we're putting the money where it needs to go. So that's kind of wearing my CEO hat. The other piece is a lot of this also is a values-based decision around, you know, as a community, do we value having affordable housing stock within our community? That really the only way we can do that is by participating in that process by giving some sort of incentive, so that way these projects can actually happen. And so I disagree a little bit with Councilor Shoup in terms of our goal. I think our goal, it wasn't that we put a moratorium on everything that we do and not make decisions because we have work to do. I think it's, these things are coming to us, they're important, we need to look at them while we also continue to do what you and AMK said, which again, Councilor Corner Live is an opportunity for us to really have those conversations, to get a lot more granular of what we want to be when we grow up and make sure that these types of decisions are easier and less about a project that comes before us where we hear the same thing because we haven't gotten alignment within our community on what do we want for affordable housing? Where do we want it? Again, the comp plan does a great job giving direction, but I think what people are looking to do is get a little bit more specific, which I think is fair, but that takes time and we can't delay everything, just because we have answers that we need to work through. So with that being said, I do want to see this project happen. I am probably leaning more towards something lower than the 75%. I think 50% over 30 years, getting 2 points, understanding that this is a highly competitive environment, more competitive than it was in the past. And that in and of itself may prevent this project from truly coming to fruition. I'm personally willing to take that gamble, even though I think affordable housing is important. I just think we have a lot of asks coming down the road to residents and trying to make sure that we keep that top of mind and prioritize where we are asking for dollars, I think is important. And so I would be more comfortable recommending to the council 50% over 30 years. So with that, I will formally motion that the Finance Committee recommends to the council that we seek a CEA that retains 50% of the new taxable value over 30 years instead of the 75% as requested by the applicant.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? No? All those in favor? All right, motion passes to, or all those opposed? Motion passes 2-1. And with that, so next item on the agenda was public comment. So if there's any other public comment related to anything in the Finance Committee's charge, if you want to come to the podium or talk online, now would be the time to do that. So is there any other public comment? No? All right. Any other things for upcoming agenda items? I know Councilor Shoup, you were taking some action to kind of work a little bit more with staff on the stormwater management. I don't know if you have an update that you guys might want to share.
I think Tom does, yeah.
Yeah, I've convened my top team, set them loose. I think we'll be in a position, I think I may have promised August, but it's gonna be September, I think. But I think we expect to do an analysis and be in a position to report on some of the high points of our findings.
Great.
So it'll be September.
September as well. All right. Is there anything that we need to meet in August? I know I watched ordinance and you guys decided to take August off. So I'm just want to see, is there anything burning that we would need to do in August, or do we want to?
I can't think of anything. School is the thing in looming in the horizon, but I don't know that there's any additional work this committee will have to do in that regard.
I think Councilor Shoup has enough vacation now, so maybe we just do that. So are you okay with not meeting in August, or is there anything? Okay. You're no longer gonna be here,
I will
so
not be on this committee. I am prepared to appoint a successor to Dawn's seat, and then I will not be sitting here next time, whether you meet in August or not,
Yeah.
my friends.
is there anybody in the audience against us not meeting in August? Just checking. No? All right. With that, then, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thanks, guys.